All right, so the first part of this little video is just me making sure that you understand all the things that were told to you in your video last night. So there are three different forms of linear equations. The first one is slope-intercept form. Make sure you have that in your notes and you've labeled it as slope-intercept because you're going to see that in directions and it's going to be important. So in slope-intercept form, the m gives me the slope and the b gives me the y-intercept. So I'm here in this first column. So if I give you an example, y equals 2x minus 5. From that equation, you know that the slope is going to be 2 over 1 and that the y-intercept is going to be negative 5. And the best way to write that is 0, negative 5. All right, in the next equation, you know that the slope is going to be negative 3 over 1 because that's the coefficient with the x. And then you know that the y-intercept is going to be positive 8, so that's 0, 8. All right, slope-intercept form is pretty easy to kind of use that information. And then if I move on to standard form, which is here in the middle, ax plus by, we learned last week that those are really easy when the numbers divide into that final c value. So in this example, I could figure out the slope if I solved for y, but as it stands, I don't necessarily know the slope. So I'm going to leave the slope blank for just a second. The x-intercept I can solve. So if I solve this for x, it's going to be 2x equals negative 10. So x is going to be negative 5. So my x-intercept is going to be negative 5, 0. And then my y-intercept, so if I solve for y, that's negative 5y equals negative 10. So my y-intercept is going to be positive 2, 0, positive 2. And I don't know any other solution. Now, you could solve for the slope on this one, and I'll actually kind of erase this lower example. We could solve for the slope here if we changed this over to slope-intercept form, which is part of what you're going to be doing today. So if I rearrange this so that I can get y by itself, all right, I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides, so that's going to give me negative 5y equals negative 2x minus 10. And then I can divide everything by negative 5. That's going to give me y equals positive 2 over 5, because it's negative divided by negative, x plus 2. All right, so in that format, I also can get that the slope is 2 over 5. Notice that it also tells me the y-intercept is positive 2, which I was able to find from the beginning. Okay, the last part of this is from point-slope form. And if you remember from your video on this one, point-slope form gives you the slope, which is this m value, and it also gives you a point on the line. You have to bring x and y together to make a point, and because they're inside parentheses, we have to think opposite. So on this example, I know that my slope is going to be positive 6 over 1. I do not know anything about my x-intercept or y-intercept. We only know those generally in standard form, sometimes in slope-intercept. But I could name another solution or point on the line, and the way to do that is to use these values with x and y and to change their signs. So instead of x being positive 1, I'm going to say negative 1. Instead of the y value being negative 2, I'm going to say positive 2. So I've got negative 1, 2. Now, just like we did with the last one, we can rearrange this so that we find the y-intercept. We can change it into slope-intercept form. Again, this is a skill you need to know for today. So if I rearrange this, it's going to give me y minus 2 equals 6x plus 6. So notice the first thing I'm going to do is distribute because I don't want parentheses. And then I need to get y by itself, which means to add 2. So that's going to give me the equation y equals 6x plus 8. So what I want you to realize is that these two equations, y minus 2 equals 6x plus 1, and y equals 6x plus 8, are the exact same thing. It's a different format of the same line. All right, so the first one told us the slope was 6, and notice this other format still tells us that same slope. The first format did not tell us a y-intercept. It told us a point on the line. -1, 2. But the second one does tell us a y-intercept, this +8. So the y-intercept we can fill in here is going to be 0, 8. Notice that on both of these, well, really kind of on any of them, the x-intercept is rarely ever used, and that's because it's not super, super important. So it's okay that we're going to leave that blank. So make sure that you understand this kind of before you move on to what you're doing today. All right, so I think I'm going to do like 1 or 2 problems of each section with you and really try to explain what I'm doing so that you feel confident enough to finish out the section. So I'm actually going to do example 2 first. And I want you to think about, first of all, the instructions, and this is really important on this whole worksheet, say to write an equation. So you need to be writing like something with an equal sign. And slope-intercept form means my equations, we want to be in the format y equals mx plus b. So we want y to be by itself. So when you graphed, this is like going backwards of what we did yesterday. Remember, when you graph, you start on the y-axis. So I would be starting at this y point on the y-axis. And then we count a slope. So what we need to do is find where has this person put the other points. So all I'm doing is I'm identifying all the places where this line crosses through the corner of a box. So when I'm writing my equation, I know that I started at -1. That's this value that's out here on its own, this b value, because it's the y-intercept. And now I want to count my slope, and just like you did yesterday, we're going to use rise over run to count your slope. So if I like zoom in here, if I could count rise over run, think about where you would start writing your name. So where you would start counting, that's going to be right here. So I'm going to do down 1 and then over 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is -1 over 4. And then I can do the same thing on this other one, down 1 over 4. Should be the same slope all the way across since it's a straight line. So then my slope is going to be -1 over 4x, because it's y equals mx plus b. All right, so all of your equations should end up in kind of this format. Now, question 1 is a slight exception to that. And that's because this line is completely horizontal. So think about, this is going to cross at 4, so we still need to find like where it's crossing. But this time, I don't have a slope. And some of you like realize the slope there is 0, but even if you weren't really sure about that, think about the only way I can get a line that's going to cut straight through the y-axis is if the line says y equals. So this example is just a y equals line, and think about where it's crossing the y. It's crossing at 4, so this is going to be y equals 4. All right, you may want to try the rest of the problems in that set and then check them before you move on. Okay, so this next set says that we want to do equations in slope-intercept form, but this time they're asking us to rewrite them. So notice they've already given us an equation, and they just want us to kind of get it flipped around so that it's in the correct order. So remember, slope-intercept form again is going to be y equals mx plus b. I'm going to do question 14 with you just because it's got kind of maybe a little trick to it, so I want to make sure that you don't get stumped there. So question 14. I want the y to be by itself. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is move this 22 over, and I'm going to do that by adding 22 to both sides. So that leaves me with 14y. Remember, I cannot add a 16x and a 22 together. One of them has an x and the other one doesn't. All right, so that means I'm going to have 16x plus 22. All right, and then I need to get the y by itself, and we talked about this yesterday. We're going to have to divide the 14 away, and we want to do that to every single problem. Okay, that's going to give me y equals, and I'm just going to write it like it is right now, 16 over 14x plus 22 over 14. And the reason I did that is because none of those divide. However, hopefully you're thinking, you should have been able to do something sooner. And you're right, I can actually simplify both of these fractions Both of them are divisible by actually 2 on everything. So if I simplify those, my final answer should be y equals 8 over 7x plus 11 over 7. And I'm getting that because I'm dividing the numerator and the denominator by 2 for each problem. Now I know that's like a yucky looking equation, but this is actually in slope-intercept form because I have this slope. First of all, I have y by itself. I've got a slope of 8 over 7, and I have a y-intercept of 11 over 7. So that is your final answer, even though it has fractions. All right, you may want to finish or try and then check this section 11 through 14 before you move on. All right, this next set is asking us to write the equations in standard form. So standard is a little bit different, and standard form, we want it to be in this final format, ax plus by equals c. And I don't know if you remember this from the video. I hope that I said it in the video, but all of these numbers, A, B, and C, we want them to be whole numbers. I don't want any fractions. Now, they may not divide into C, but I don't want them to have fractions in them. That's like definitely not okay. So the problem I want to work with you in this set is question number 16. And the reason is because it has fractions. I want to make sure you know how to get rid of those. So question 16. All right, so there's really 2 reasons why this one is not in standard form. The first one is the x and the y are not on the left side, and the other issue that we've got going on is that x and y, or not x and y, but there are fractions in this problem, so we need to get rid of those fractions first. And if you remember back from the beginning of the year, we get rid of fractions by multiplying by denominators. All right, so to get rid of this, I'm going to multiply every single term by 3. All right, so that's this first term, that term, this negative 2/3 y. Those are my 3 different terms. And remember, multiplying by 3 is with the fractions is going to cancel. Now, it's not canceling the whole fraction. It's canceling these 2 3's. So I'm going to be left with negative 2. 3 times x, nothing cancels, so that's just 3x. Negative 2/3 y times 3, the 3's cancel, so you're left with negative 2y. So notice that just one step got rid of all our fractions. And then we're going to need to kind of rearrange this so it's ax plus by equals c. So really I just need this x and y to be on the other side. And since they're already together, I'm literally just going to take these 2 terms and switch them. 3x minus 2y equals negative 2. Okay, so that's what you're doing when you're writing in standard form, is you're getting it to where x and y are on the same side and that you have no fractions throughout the problem. Notice, again, these numbers may not divide well, so it's not good for intercepts, but it's still in standard form. All right, so that being said, you're probably going to want to try questions 15 through, I think, 18 before you move on to the next set. All right, we're nearing the end. This set says to write the slope-intercept form. That means they want my final answer to be in the form y equals mx plus b. And they're asking me to write an equation for each one. So make sure your final answer is an equation, not a slope or just anything else. I'm going to pick one of the more challenging ones that just has some additional steps to it. I would like for you to put a little star next to question 22. We're going to do that one, but probably do that one tomorrow together in class. All right, and before we do question 23 together, I would like for you to put a little star in your notes, or maybe a big star rather. You should always, or almost always, start with point-slope form. I know that this is asking you to write a slope-intercept equation, but 98% of the time, and this is the star that you're putting in your notes, right? 98% of the time, you are going to start with point-slope formula, okay? So let's look at question 23 together. 23 gives us 2 points, and I just said we need to start with point-slope formula, so that's this y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Okay, I said in the video last night, well, the first thing we need to do is find the slope here. So you all know how to do that. That's from last week, y2 minus y1, so -5 minus -4 over x2 minus x1, 4 minus -3. All right, so if we work that out, those minus negatives become positives, so -5 plus 4 over 4 plus 3. That's going to give me -1 over 7. All right, so here's my slope. Now, with point slope form, we also need a point. That's why it's called point slope form. So I've got the slope, I now need a point. That point is going to be in these x1, y1 spots. You can pick either point. It makes no difference. If you always want to pick the first one, pick the first one. I tend to pick one that either has the same signs or has smaller numbers. So I'm actually going to pick -3, -4 right here. All right, so let's go about by setting up our equation. So I'm going to do y, and then it's minus y1, or you can just think opposite. So this is going to be y plus 4 equals our slope that we just found, -1 over 7, x, and then our x value is this -3, or we can think opposite and say x plus 3. Okay, you need to know, pause, rewind, and rewatch the video if you do not understand how I set this up. Ask a neighbor if you need help, but you have to know how to set this up. Okay, now our goal, remember what we wrote in the directions. Our goal here is to get y by itself. So I'm going to multiply. I need to get rid of parentheses first, so I'm going to distribute. So that's going to give me y plus 4 equals -1 over 7x. Remember, when you multiply by fractions, it's the top part that multiplies, so -3 over 7. And then we need to minus this 4. Now, with slope-intercept, we don't want to get rid of fractions. We want to get y by itself. So I need to be subtracting 4 from both sides. And some of you may already be having like anxiety because you're trying to multiply or work that out. You can use a calculator, right? So we can type in -3 divided by 7 minus 4, and it's going to give you some nasty decimal. And then remember, we learned last week, you can hit the math button on your calculator, and if you hit enter twice after that, it should give you a fraction back. So your answer here is going to be y equals -1 over 7x, and I think the fraction they give you is 31 over 4. I think it's -31 over 4, so I'm going to say -31 over 4 in my final answer. Oh, and not over 4. That's wrong. Over 7. Oh, it's not an eraser. Don't laugh at me. All right, over 7. So rewatch this if you need to. Remember, this is the trickiest example, but you may have some like this on your test, so you need to make sure you know how to do these. If I were you, I would work this set and check it before you move on. Okay, this last page looks very similar. Looks like very similar to the previous set you did, except for it says write the slope-intercept form of the equation. Slope-intercept form is ax plus by equals c. It means we don't want any fractions, and we want x and y to end up on the same side of the equation. Okay, now some of these may be a little trickier than the one I'm going to pick, but I want to give you one that looks a little bit different than what we've done so far. So I'm going to zoom in, and let's do question 27 together. So I told you, and you put a really big star in your notes, you're going to always start with with point slope form. So we're going to be starting with this y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Now what's nicer about this one is they already give me the slope and the point. So there's no step I have to do first. I'm ready to go ahead and set up my equation. So I'm going to plug in y. My y value is +5, so I want to do the opposite of that. So y minus 5 equals the slope, 9 over 2, times the x value, which is 2, and I want to do the opposite of that, so that's x minus 2. All right, again, ask your neighbor if you need help, but make sure you understand why I'm setting it up like this before you go any further. Okay, I need to get rid of fractions, and I'm going to need to get rid of parentheses. So I'm going to start with getting rid of the parentheses first. So I'm going to distribute this 9 over 2. So it's going to give me y minus 5 equals 9 over 2x minus, if you multiply this, you can get 18 over 2. And then let's simplify that so that we can have an easier number to look at. Y minus 5 equals 9 over 2x minus 9. Okay, now our job is to get x and y on the same side and to get rid of the fractions. Well, if it were me, I would try to get rid of the fractions first. You know me, I don't like fractions. I don't want to deal with them, so I'm going to try to get rid of them first by multiplying everything by 2, just like we did in the previous problems. So this is 2y minus 10 equals, here the 2's cancel, 9x minus 18. All right, we're almost there. Our job is to get x and y on the same side. So I'm going to move the x over by subtracting 9x. So now my equation is going to read negative 9x plus 2y minus 10 equals negative 18. And then I'm going to add the 10 because I know it shouldn't be on this left side, right? On the left side, I just want the x and y values. So then I'm going to go back and I'm going to add 10 to both sides. All right, that's going to give me negative 9x plus 2y equals negative 8. Now, if you leave your answer like this, I'm not going to count that wrong. However, if you check the answer key, I believe the answer key is going to tell you the answer is 9x minus 2y equals positive 8. And the reason that the answer key is saying that, notice like what's happening between those two. So you should see that all of them, the signs are just completely opposite. Officially with standard form, you don't want this very first number to be negative. So if it is negative, you're going to have to divide everything by -1 or multiply everything by -1, either way, to change the sign so that this first initial value is positive. However, because I'm not being super picky, so unless you have multiple choice, I am okay with either format. If you want to leave it with the negative in the front and don't worry about changing it so you don't mess anything up, that's fine with me. All right, make sure you understand this one, and then I think you're ready to work most of the problems 25 through 30.